This is the first scandal I can think of in really the decade plus of the Trump era, where he cannot escape something. He's throwing everything in the kitchen sink out into the media, and nothing is distracting us.
Welcome back, everyone, to Brogressive. We've got a really fun episode today. We are joined by Peter Rothpletz, also known as Peter Twinklage on Twitter. He recently wrote an article in The Guardian about Jeffrey Epstein and why Democrats need to capitalize on this moment and utilize this scandal to paint Donald Trump for what he is, which is a man who protects elites over all else and doesn't really care about ordinary people. So Peter is also the head writer on the Don Lemon show. I know he just finished taping there, so we appreciate him making the time. But Peter, thank you for joining us.
And David, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Let's talk about some PDF files. Let's get into it.
Let's. So I loved your article. I
Thank
thought it
you.
was like incredibly easy to read and very entertaining. But I thought you made some excellent points that are
Thank
very
you.
relevant right now. So could you just talk a little bit about the thesis behind the article and why you feel like this Epstein scandal is something that will actually damage Trump after we've had, God, 12 years of thinking, how's he going to wiggle his way out of this one? And seems like this one he can't. So why do you think that is? And why do you think that provides such an opening for Democrats?
Yeah, I say right at the top of the piece that Democrats must not let Jeffrey Epstein die. And so far, they've managed to do just that. This is the first scandal I can think of in really the decade plus of the Trump era, where he cannot escape something. He's throwing everything in the kitchen sink out into the media, and nothing is distracting us. Perhaps like the Texas redistricting situation has drawn a few eyeballs in the past few days, excuse me. But for the most part, folks are laser focused on this story. It's been 4 weeks now. We are 4 weeks into this sordid, terrible, gross saga. And I think the reason why it's so important for Democrats to keep this going, to make sure the story has momentum, is that this episode, it manages to prove three things to not just the median American voter, but the MAGA base. And that is one, that Trump is a liar, objectively speaking. Two, Trump is a hypocrite, objectively speaking. And three, as you said a second ago, Ben, Trump protects elites. He is a sneering elitist who only cares about the rich and influential. And I think that truth is finally breaking through to even his most diehard supporters.
Yeah, and I think compared to a lot, like even the Texas redistricting, that maybe has taken up some space among us tuned in nerds who care about that stuff. But I do feel like this really broke through among the normies and
Mhm.
people who hardly follow politics, just even through memes and things like that. Um, why do you think that Trump has struggled so hard to kind of get past this? Is he just kind of using his same strategies from the past and they're not working? Or, I mean, obviously the facts of the case are pretty damning and it's pretty hard for him to explain it away in a way that he would before, especially considering how much his people campaigned on this. But why do you think he's failed to kind of like change the story and get people talking about Obama being arrested in an AI video or whatever?
First and foremost, it's because the call is coming from inside the House. It's his own supporters. It's Charlie Kirk. It's Benny Johnson. It's all of these, Cartman like dude bros behind podcast mics who have been interested in this story, have been obsessed with this story because Trump hand fed it to them for a decade. And they don't understand why Trump won't just release the damn files. Um, with all previous scandals, it's always been liberals, it's been the mainstream media, it's been Democrats who have been hounding him. This is the first time that I can think of that he has a real, genuine scandal with the base.
I'm just thinking about, the dynamics for 2026. And I think, Democrats have had some pretty strong polls recently in the generic congressional ballot, maybe a little more so than I would, be expecting coming in blind,
Yeah.
hearing about the world that we live in. And I'm kind of curious, how do you think that this will kind of trickle down to those elections in 2026, considering that, it's a really serious, obviously, story and scandal, but it is very, distant from the average congressional Republican, I would say.
Yeah, and one point I raise in the piece, David, and I think that's a great observation, is that Democrats cannot have Epstein be the only message. Um, I raise how back in 2007, far sharper, far more spry Joe Biden was on a Democratic primary debate stage, and he pretty much ended Rudy Giuliani's career with one clever line, which was every sentence that comes out of Rudy Giuliani's mouth has a noun, a verb, and 9/11. And as I write in the piece, the line was lethal, one, because it was funny, but two, because it was true. Everyone recognized that for years, Giuliani had seized upon, had capitalized on, Ben, to use a word that you said earlier, this horrific, horrific trauma that had befallen the entire country, especially New York City. Um, and so that is the trap door that Democrats need to avoid. They, when a sentence comes out of their mouth, there needs to be a noun, there needs to be a verb, there needs to be Jeffrey Epstein, and then there needs to be a tie-in to kitchen table issues, to oligarchy, to the cost of living, to actually make the argument to use Epstein as a vehicle to catch folks' attention and to help them understand why the Epstein scandal is illustrative of all the other things that Trump has failed at and all the other ways in which he's making their lives worse.
That kind of leads me to a question. I don't know if you saw it, but there's a pretty prolific interview that Alyssa Slotkin had on Breaking Points, and so she was asked about Epstein, and she basically was like really said, but I just think this whole thing is dumb because it's like distracting us from kitchen table issues. And I was just curious your thoughts on kind of how she framed the issue, which I thought was a little bit surprising because she has been, she has a lot of moderate tendencies and voting record, but for instance, on redistricting, she's been very uh, outspoken about being aggressive. So I'm kind of curious maybe why you think she responded the way she did, and if you think that's incorrect, how it should be reframed.
I am curious, did that answer come before or after Crystal Ball fried
It
her
was the first
ass?
topic on the
The
interview.
first topic.
Very
Okay.
first, yeah.
So that's interesting. I wonder if it had come later, if she would have had a different answer, because I know that the big headline from that interview was her comments about Gaza. No, I'd say, in preparing for this conversation, I read that Axios piece that you guys sent me about how some Democrats really do not want to talk about Epstein. I think it was Tom Suozzi, the New York congressman, who said in particular, he's done discussing this issue. And I fundamentally don't understand that position. I think in reading the piece, it was Pramila Jayapal, right? Yes, the former Progressive Caucus chair who said, I'm talking about Medicaid, I'm talking about tax breaks to billionaires, and I'm talking about Epstein because he fits right in there. Yes, yes, period. End of sentence. That is correct. That is the point. I think that there is a reluctance from some Democrats to engage in Epstein for two reasons. One, yes, to Swazi's point and to Slotkin's point, yeah, every sentence that you say about Epstein is a sentence you're not talking about affordability and the cost of living. Absolutely. However, excuse me. And then number two, I think there's a reluctance from Democrats because they feel like they don't want to feed the beast. They don't want to feed this dark, sordid, QAnon-esque conspiracy theory. And my answer to them on the first point is, to quote Pramila Jayapal, Epstein fits in with the cost of living and affordability and elites. And to my latter point, what I would say is there's no real conspiracy theory here, right? We know for a fact that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell trafficked hundreds of girls. Hundreds of girls were sexually abused, were traumatized, and he was effectively supplying them to a hell of a lot of powerful people in this country. I don't understand, the reticence to engage with it just because it's a disturbing, despicable tale. That's exactly why you should be talking about it. You should be demanding justice and accountability for these victims.
I almost feel like they have like trauma from the first Trump term and are thinking about this is another culture war issue. And I think they're missing the important point you made earlier, that this is actually coming from the Republican side. This is coming from his base. This isn't some liberal issue. It's not a Russiagate. It's not Stormy Daniels. I feel like they almost lump it into that.
Yes.
But I actually thought Jeffries had like a good point on this where he was saying the reality is it's all connected. Donald Trump, his administration, and House Republicans have delivered nothing more than a government of the billionaires, by the billionaires, for the billionaires. So
Yes.
I think he's kind of echoing your point there. But I don't know. Do you think that this is going to be able to last until 2026 in a meaningful way? Like it almost a little bit feels to me like it's died down even a tiny bit in the last week or so. There's maybe just a limit in our current media ecosystem for how long a story can stay in the news. I mean, obviously none of his like, oh, are we still talking about Epstein stuff is working, but do you feel like it can continue to drag out? I mean, I guess when Congress gets back into session, there will
I was going to
probably
say
be a
that.
vote. Yeah. So if you could talk about like how you see kind of the next year or so going with this story.
I don't know if it can go all the way till next November. That would be an interesting thing to watch. I do think that this has legs for at least the next few months. One, yes, to your point, Ben, Congress is going to come back in September. And I think that Mike Johnson and Oversight Chair Comer have like prematurely shot themselves in the foot by subpoenaing all these officials, but no one really relevant to the actual story. Why is Alex Acosta, Trump's former labor secretary, if I'm not mistaken, who gave Epstein this unbelievably ridiculous sweetheart deal, why is he not being subpoenaed? Um, why is Ghislaine Maxwell apparently now she's escaped this testimony that she was originally set to deliver? And then like I think Comer and Johnson and a host of these Republicans who are squirming, who know that they're in a bad place, they think that September will turn the tide in the story because, oh, we subpoenaed Bill Clinton and Clinton's going to come talk about us and the Democrats are going to be embarrassed. They don't give a flying fuck about Bill Clinton. If Bill Clinton was in the Epstein files, if he diddled some kids, then throw him behind bars. I don't think there's any love lost in the Democratic Party right now for Bill Clinton.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if that provides a bit of an opportunity for Democrats. I'm thinking about Ezra Klein's appearance on the Flagrant Andrew Schultz podcast, and he was talking. They watched the clip of Jon Ossoff talking about corruption, and he was pointing out how important it was for Ossoff to use the both sides framing in terms of kind of creating this image of like a new Democratic Party in a sense, kind of shaking the like conceptions people have of it. So I wonder if almost Clinton can be kind of a sacrificial lamb for them to
Yeah.
some new generation of Democrats to be like, sure, like wherever the corruption is, wherever the scandal is, please go after it. And we're the real anti-institution like outsiders fighting to get what you guys have been asking for.
Yeah, if I can pick on that for just a second, Ben, I wrote another piece in December of last year, another column for The Guardian, um, titled "Luigi Mangione is the Median American Voter." Spicy title, but I think the argument of the piece is actually not nearly as crazy as the title makes it seem. In the aftermath of the CEO's murder, and then subsequently in the aftermath of Mangione's arrest, I went through his social media profile and I was watching all of these talking heads express befuddlement as to what his politics were. They were like, what do you mean he follows both AOC and Joe Rogan? Why is he following RFK Jr. and Ezra Klein? And what I argue in that piece, and I really firmly believe that, or rather believe this, is that the dominant divide in American politics is not conservative versus liberal or Republican versus Democrat or even fascist versus anti-fascist, as strange as that might sound. Um, it's pro-system versus anti-system. And if you look at all of the folks that Mangione was engaging with, all of them are anti-system figures. Some of them are very obviously anti-system, and like an RFK Jr. or a Joe Rogan, um, or an AOC, right? And then some of them, my editor was like, "What do you mean? How is Ezra Klein an anti-system figure?" And I said, "Well, who was the first personality, the first voice in mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream legacy media to say the emperor has no clothes, that Joe Biden is clearly cognitively declining and need to drop out?" It was Ezra Klein in February of 2024. That gives you anti-system street cred from my point of view. And so I raise all of this to say that I think the power of the Epstein saga for Democrats is not just because they should do it because it's the right thing to do, because we should be seeking justice and accountability for these women, but it also achieves something that they've never been able to do before, and that is paint Donald Trump as a pro-system figure, as a pro-system political avatar. Um, One other thing I raised in the piece is a theory first put forth by New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman, and that is that sort of Trump's secret sauce, or rather, to understand Trump's secret sauce, you need to understand how New York high society works. And in New York high society, there are effectively two different types of elites in concentric circles. There is a core ring of folks with status and influence and sort of a certain shine around them. And then there's a broader circle of folks who are rich or are titans of industry, what have you. And Trump has been the political dynamo that he's been for the last decade or more because he's managed to straddle that line, right? Where he's always presented himself as elite in the sense that he was a rich man who was good at business, but he never had status. He never had that shine, and he could credibly attack the system because of that. What the Epstein scandal shows is no, he's in that core ring. He is an elitist piece of shit. And that is the power, that is the value.
I think that's a fantastic point. I feel like Harris in 2024, a lot of the campaign was kind of based around defending institutions and the status quo. And I think Trump, his other secret sauce, I think kind of in his first term related to this, is that he could point to the deep state, which, I mean, call it that or not, there were people certainly who were broadly supportive of him, but kind of held back his worst impulses in his first term. And he talked about how he was going to do this, and he's followed through, that he did learn his lessons, and this is now a government by Donald Trump for Donald Trump. And so he doesn't really have anyone he can scapegoat within the administration. I mean, maybe it gets to the point where it's Pam Bondi, but I don't think so. But so I feel like that also, it creates an opening for Democrats to actually run as the anti-institution. I saw a clip of Mallory McMorrow on Twitter, where she was talking about the Epstein list, and she's running for Senate in Michigan. And she was talking about like how this is just another sign of the rot that exists in our institutions. And it's such a contrast to how we ran in 2024. Do you feel like Democrats are going to be comfortable doing that, or are they going to kind of fall back into like, we need to defend our institutions that Trump is trying to destroy, which might be true, but I don't know if that's the best framing.
I think they have to. I think they have to run at the system. I think they have to effectively run at the Democratic Party. Right now, the only Democrats that I see that are even remotely above water right now are folks who are literally antagonistic towards the Democratic Party. McMorrow, I think, is one of the party's most talented messengers right now. She is an oomph. I should lay that on the table. And yeah, she nails the exact message that I talk about and that I want all Democrats to say. Ben and David, I raised this in our sort of preparation doc for this chat. One of the things I said was, if you had asked a bunch of average Americans, which party in America is the radical conservative party? Not a huge number of Americans, but an alarmingly sizable group would say the Democrats. And why is that? Because they're conservative in the sense that, yes, as Ben, you pointed out, they have made themselves the party of the status quo. They've made themselves the party of institutions, which is fundamentally conservative. And over the last 10, 20 years, they have decided to take the 20% side on a bunch of 80-20 issues, which is the definition of radicalism. And I think you can use Epstein as a vehicle to fix both of those things, to reestablish the party as anti-system, and to also position yourself on the side of an issue that is actually the 80%, reflective of a wide majority of the American people.
Yeah, I completely agree. I wonder what candidates you see in 2028 as best positioned to kind of make this argument. Someone like a Pete Buttigieg, who might be able to very effectively make that kind of argument, obviously is tied directly to the last administration. So does it have to be someone who can credibly claim to be an outsider, or is it more just about messaging as one and arguing against the like status quo, is that enough for people to buy your outsider credibility?
I love Buttigieg. I think he is one of the most um, talented messengers in the party. I think he's dead in the water for 2028. I hope I eat my words. I hope he ends up being the candidate and ends up winning because I think he'd be a fantastic commander in chief. My worry, as you just raised, Ben, is that anyone who is even remotely tangentially connected to this past administration and, original sin, as Tapper and Thompson write about, is just a non-starter for voters. I think folks genuinely, deeply, and rightfully feel that the coterie around former President Biden really did hide his cognitive decline from the country. And there are just so many sound bites of Pete and other former administration officials saying that Biden was as sharp as a tack. And I think that's just going to be such an anchor, such an albatross on any of their campaigns. Um, so yeah, for any candidate, for any Dem candidate to be successful in 2028, I think they need to not have been remotely close to the administration. They probably will not even have or would not have had large political profiles over the last 4 years. Um, I don't know. What do you guys think? Who are your favorites?
I think that Flagrant podcast really got me all the way on the Jon Ossoff train. They were eating that message up. They said he looked like Superman. And I think I can very much see him getting a lot of spotlight if he wins in 2026, which I would expect him to now. And kind of being the highest profile victory coming out of the midterms, leading right into the primary. I could see him raising his name rec a lot with Democratic voters in the primary, and then I really do think you raised Luigi Mangione earlier. I think running a hot candidate, I think, is something that will help in the primary and the general election. So I'm also, I don't feel like he's too. I mean, yes, he's been in power a while, but I don't think he really has his name tied too much to like the establishment Democratic Party. I think people could pretty believably buy him as an outsider kind of person. But
I think you were joking about running a hot candidate, but I'm not. I tweeted this right after
yeah.
Zoran Mamdani won the Democratic nomination for the in the New York mayoral race. Um, I think that Zoran's politics are not transferable to a lot of other places in the country, but the fact he's hot is run hot people. The aforementioned Liz Smith, Oomphy, retweeted that when I posted it. She and her political instincts are on the money. Run hot, charismatic candidates who can credibly message to voters.
Circling back on something, I actually forget who said it, but it may have been you, Ben. You mentioned about Pam Bondi specifically, and I think her kind of relationship to this whole scenario is like very curious. I'm wondering if Trump is angry with her at all for her handling of it, or is there some potential that she's a scapegoat? Like, I don't know. Is there some, in a couple months, is Trump going to be like, yeah, I always wanted to release them, and like Money was like, no, and then they, release something that is supposed to be a more expanded release, and is that a path how he wiggles his way out of this one? I'm just wondering, kind of how does this impact Bondi's security within this administration?
I guess I just don't see what making Bondi the fall guy, the fall gal, so to speak, accomplishes. The Epstein files still won't be released. They're still going to have this exact same problem on their hands. I was watching this at this point was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. There was a clip of Megyn Kelly chatting with Ben Shapiro, and Megan just goes on this long rant about how Bondi's been an idiot and she's totally screwed this up, and um, you know, Trump needs to let at least one head roll to get the base off his back. Again, like, to what extent? To what end? What does that accomplish if Bondi leaves? There's another person takes her place, and they will not be releasing the Epstein files.
What do you see as their, I don't know if they have one, if they're just kind of going day to day off the whim of Trump, but what do you think their strategy is? Are they just hoping to wait this out, or do you think there is kind of like a break glass in case of emergency plan? I mean, I know there was reporting that there was going to be an emergency Epstein summit at the VP's residence with JD Vance, but that was allegedly canceled, maybe not canceled. They're claiming it's fake news or whatever, but I'm sure there are meetings going on. So guess I could foresee them, like, especially if the House votes to do it, releasing some form of the files that include whatever and excludes the things that they say would re-victimize the victims, and then hoping that's enough. But I mean, I think we've seen what this conspiracy crowd through all the like JFK stuff. It's never enough. They're always going to say, "Oh, there's something redacted. That must be where it's coming from." So I don't know what do you think is the internal Trump strategy if there is one right now?
Yeah, I think Trump is playing the dumbest version of four-dimensional chess I've ever seen, dumbest game of four-dimensional chess I've ever seen. It's very clear from my perspective what they're going to do. They moved Ghislaine Maxwell from the facility where she was being held in Florida to this summer camp in Texas where she's palling around with Real Housewives and Elizabeth Holmes. She's already sat for, I believe, a 9-hour deposition over the course of 2 days with Todd Blanche, the deputy AG. And at least ABC News is reporting that she told Todd Blanche she never saw Trump do anything untoward with or around Jeffrey Epstein. Which is a quick aside to crib some language from Tim Miller. Wow, stop the fucking presses. Like, convicted sexual predator PDF file says that she saw nothing strange about Trump's behavior. Okay, what a ringing endorsement. Fantastic for MAGA.
Well, he's the one person who can make her life better over the next few years. Like,
yeah, and she has
he has
every
all the power.
incentive to lie. I
Yeah.
don't see how even the most diehard Trump supporter uh, thinks she has any credibility whatsoever. And if I could quickly go on one quick tangent, Trump should be thanking his lucky stars that Ghislaine Maxwell is a woman, because I think it's really only because of her gender and because she was technically the accomplice and not the main perpetrator of these crimes that I think folks don't really appreciate just how much of a violent horror that she is as a person. Um, they don't appreciate that in many of the cases she was actively engaging in the assault. And not just the grooming, but the assault, the actual attacks on these young girls. And I just think, God, if the roles were reversed and Ghislaine were a man, or God forbid, like a queer man, I think Trump would already be impeached. He's his entire political career is riding on the fact that she has, XX chromosomes.
You mentioned impeachment, and I'm just like, I don't think there's any universe, no matter what Trump did, that would ever convince, say Democrats win the House, 17 to 19 Republican senators to vote for his impeachment or removal, rather. So I'm just curious, what makes you say that in that turn of events?
Yeah, well, for one, I was speaking rather loosely, but I do stand by the sentiment that if Ghislaine were a man, it would be a far bigger problem for him. Um, and as a quick aside, I joked about this on Twitter the other day. I do find it actually quite heartwarming, quite encouraging that we as a society have not sought to find out actually how to pronounce her first name. I've seen it pronounced Ghislaine, 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 Ghislaine. It's just fantastic. No one gives a shit to give her the respect to actually ask how to pronounce her name. It's fantastic. I love it.
Well, and David, on not necessarily on the impeachment point, but I do think one interesting thing to talk about this going forward is that 2028. I mean, Trump can still talk about running or whatever, but it's going to be JD Vance in all likelihood.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder, like, well, one, if the scandal can even last long enough that it would be remotely relevant by then, but how much is JD Vance tainted by this kind of stuff? I mean, he does seem to me to be a figure who probably will be more willing or more adept than Kamala was at kind of finding ways to separate from the most unpopular stuff. Obviously, that kind of depends on where Trump is during that election. But I don't know, like what scenario, if the midterms went really, really poorly, is there a world in which like JD Vance is starting his campaign and kind of I don't know that that would lead to impeachment under some massive scandal even, but how do you foresee JD Vance kind of continuing to handle this and then leading into a presidential run?
That's tough to say. I do know, and David, I'm not sure if you referenced this earlier. I don't think so. I think there's new CNN polling showing among likely Republican voters, primary voters, that he's currently like 40% the favorite. And then there's Hegseth, maybe Rubio, and a couple of others who are all in the single digits. He's clearly the heir apparent. In fact, I think Trump mused about that this week. It's very hard to say because, to both of your points, it's going to be tough to carry this story into next year with real momentum. I think it's going to stick around for a while, but I don't know about 10, 12, 14 months.
I think that someone who will carry it is whoever is an out of administration figure who wants to win the primary. I think that, a an open primary like that, even if Trump, endorses Vance, I think that this is just my personal intuition. I think that with events towards the rest of the administration are going to cause Vance's numbers to go down rather than up. Now, the magnitude may only be a few percent, but I don't see him, like rising, for instance, like how Trump did. But I do think that, an open Republican primary could dig up these issues, even if they kind of die down in common discourse.
Yeah, I mean, JD Vance has all the charisma and grace of a tuna fish hoagie. He is not Trump. Trump is sui generis. And I could totally see a situation where a really cynical fuck like Tucker Carlson enters the fray, and he has some credibility on the Epstein files. He ranted about it for years on Fox, and he could say, why the hell did JD Vance cover up this horrific situation? I think he could shift him hard. Does he have any real interest in doing so? I doubt it, but I could see that happening.
I was going to say that I don't think there's going to be any sort of 2028 primary for the Republicans, and I think JD will like clear the field. But I didn't think about Tucker Carlson. I do think that actually is the one person who I could foresee like effectively doing that. I don't know that it would like fully work, but I could see him being someone who's like brazen enough to consider doing it and not necessarily like mind the consequences of it. But like in terms of talking about this, like staying in the discourse going forward, something I've been talking about a lot on this podcast and just for years is that Democrats have really, when we talk about Gen Z in the 2024 election, I think they really struggled to understand the non-news sources that people get information from in our generation, and like the pages that are apolitical, the rap TVs of the world stars that post like those very clickbaity posts with like a headline or something. And I think a lot of the issues Democrats talk about are never going to end up on that page, even if they affect most voters, like Medicaid stuff. And this really has broken through. And I don't know. Obviously, all of our feeds are so segregated now. Who's to tell if this is something that everyone's seeing? But like the amount of memes I think I've seen from this, and just like the comments on any clip of Trump talking about this, I think it's reached the point where there is nothing he could do to convince those people. The amount of, I don't know, videos of him talking like Palpatine about the files and how they're not real. I just think that stuff has actually really broken through to that demographic. And I don't really see anything he could conceivably do. Like you talked about how it kind of revealed him for what he is, but I think it was just almost opens their eyes to how, because he kind of lies about things in the same obvious way all the time, but maybe they're not tuned in enough to see that. So I almost feel like every time they see him on their screen going forward, those types of people are going to think back to this and be like, well, it kind of seems like he's using the same bullshit tone. And like, I don't know, does it kind of just crack his ability to appeal to this demographic, even if he's not talking about an Epstein issue? I hope, but.
Hope so too. I alluded to this earlier when I said of Rudy Giuliani, Democrats need to avoid the trap of noun verb just Jeffrey Epstein. They need to use it as a lightning rod to grab attention, and then in the next few seconds that they have before Gen Z starts talking about Labubu's, actually speak on their agenda. That is key. In a weird way, bear with me. And I want to hear what you guys think about this. Epstein kind of reminds me of what the wall did for Trump in 2015, in that it was obviously a big swing, and it was so easy to understand. It was like, what, 2 words, or I guess build the wall 3 words. And it was super easy to conceptualize. The mission of, or rather the goal of the policy was very clear. And it spoke to a far larger, far broader universe of policies that voters actually wanted. Like, they wanted immigration reform, but to go into the nitty gritty of a path to citizenship or yada, 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 voters don't give a shit about that. They might want it in the back of their heads, but they want a short, concise, big swing to just sum up in, again, one single sentence, everything that they want, but they're not quite able to verbalize themselves. And in 2015 and 2016, it was build the wall. Just the wall, the physical symbol of the wall on the southern border. And I think
Yeah.
Epstein accomplishes that for Democrats.
I really see moments now kind of where Republicans, they love railing against, the establishment in a number of ways. Just like any debate in 2026, Republican spends all their time talking about, one of those instances of corruption or anti-establishment, and all the Democrat just has to say is release the files, and it kind of like really neutralizes their ability. They're like, okay, that's great that you say those things, but the files aren't released, so why should anybody care what you have to say? So
Good point. Absolutely.
100%. Comparing it to other elections, I loved how you ended the article, talking about how you were comparing it to the famous line from the Trump ad, the Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you. Just framing it around elites, that Trump protects elites. That's why he's protecting Epstein's circle, but who's protecting you? And kind of, I almost wonder, I mean, maybe this is a little more risky. I know immigration's not Democrats' best issue, and people can argue about whether it's good to talk about it or not, but some of the just recklessness of like sending people to El Salvador, all this kind of stuff. Democrats are there to protect you, and there's all this scary shit going on under Trump, and he's focused on protecting his elite friends, and no one is protecting you, whether it's from, I don't know, starving or not having access to medical care, but also just like this administration's cruelty. And can you talk a little bit about like why you think that's such an effective messaging about elites and protection?
Yeah, I think it's effective because it verbalizes a truth that most Americans feel, which is that the rich don't give a shit about them. There are two systems of justice in this country, one for the wealthy and well-connected, and one for everyday Joes. And this story just sums up all of that very neatly for Democrats. Going back to what you said about the Kamala attack line, vicious, transphobic, obviously, cruel. Um, but the reason why it worked is that, again, there is that sort of unspoken perception that a lot of voters feel that Democrats prioritize their, any given name your minority group over them. And the line was just so concise and, again, monstrous, but short, kind of clever, and it spoke out an unspoken truth, or at least a perceived truth in their minds. And I think that a Trump protects elites, Trump protects Epstein, release the files, all of those messages can be just as effective, if not more effective.
I totally agree. And I remember Sarah McBride was talking about this on her Ezra Klein appearance, how there were polls in 2024 that showed they asked voters, like, first, what are the top 5 issues to you? And then for each party, like, what issues do you feel like are their number one issues, or rank the issues in terms of importance to them? And that a significant higher number of the Republican issues were also listed on the voters' issues. I mean, the economy, I forget exactly what they were, but I believe that for Democrats, the only one was healthcare. And the rest of them were like LGBT rights or civil rights, the reproductive healthcare. Obviously, like a lot of these things were on their own grounds, solid issues for Democrats where the public was on their side, but that talking about them kind of like reinforces this narrative that these are the most important things to Democrats, to the exclusion of these other issues that are important to you. And I wonder, tying it to elites and in a sense to the economy, does that provide an opening to make that kind of thing more sexy for a candidate to talk about and rebuild the Democrats' image as like maybe corruption is their number one issue, for example, something like that?
Yeah, I think I could be mistaken, but I believe in the 2006 midterms, corruption was really Democrats' main message, and they did quite well. Um, but yes, to your point, Ben, I think what this story does for Democrats is it marries a bunch of things that separately are powerful, but together are potentially lethal. And that it takes the kitchen table issues and the cost of living and the affordability conversation, and it unites it with the populist sort of fighting the oligarchy tour energy that AOC and Bernie captured. And then it also brings in a little bit of conspiracy, which I know Democrats, as I was alluding to earlier, sometimes get uncomfortable with that. It's important. I don't know if y'all are familiar. Oh God, there was a piece. It was fantastic. I think it was Jonathan Van Last over at the Bulwark who wrote about this maybe about 6 months ago. But and I'm going to get it slightly wrong, but he talked about the kook realignment in this
Oh
country,
yeah,
and it's this idea, or maybe it was crank realignment.
yeah. I think
It's this notion, or not notion, it's this very real phenomenon that if you go back like 20, 25 years, there's a pretty equal spread of kind of kooky, crazy people in both parties. You had, plenty of Democrats, liberals who believed in chemtrails, Dems.
RFK was almost in the Obama administration.
Yeah, what flames or jet fuel can't melt steel beams. You had plenty of folks like that on the left, and over the course of the last quarter century, all of them have found themselves in the Republican Party, which, yeah, we need to get the kooks back. At least
We
some of them,
do.
a small percentage of them, and the Epstein story is a great way to do that.
100%. Like the education polarization stuff has definitely screwed us in that respect. And I think that also those are the kinds of things people care about online, and like the Gen Z stuff that you see. If you're someone who hardly cares about politics, you're not interested in some bill that's passing. You're interested in a conspiracy theory or just a story about some politician confirming your instincts about politicians being evil and corrupt, or however they're portrayed in every movie you would ever see about them. People will point to the Michelle Obama line, and Democrats love to be like, well, we're done taking the high road. We're going to fight dirty. But I don't feel like they understand what fighting dirty is in the ecosystem of today. I remember when people would talk about the Stormy Daniels stuff, thinking that was fighting dirty, or when Biden, at the end of that awful debate, I remember he tried to bring it up and it was just came off as weird. It was like, I didn't sleep with a porn star with my wife, and that kind of stuff isn't where fighting dirty works. I think it's things that confirm people's suspicions about politicians in a way that they can then justify voting about. Like, I don't know, we've had Daruni on a few times, and she kind of has this theory that I a little bit agree with, that when you ask voters about their like top issues about an election, or why they voted the way they did, like what were the top issues, I think a lot of voters like know that the economy is what they're kind of supposed to say. Like they don't really want to say necessarily something that seems a little more frivolous, or even maybe they've a little bit kind of rationalized it into some reason that it would be the economy. But I think for a lot of voters, if you really dug deep into what led them to do a vote, a lot of times it is something small.
Hmm.
And we can talk about like many of the things that Democrats did that were or are blamed for because some person on Twitter did that like maybe led people to change their voting preferences. But yeah, I don't think that like I think this is an issue that is something like that, where it might not even show up in the polls, say in the midterms, where people are like, yeah, Epstein was my number one issue. But I think it kind of it could start some people's progression back to kind of questioning Trump again.
Yeah, I like what you said about how Democrats realize that we're facing an existential political crisis in this country, and they need to start, or rather, they need to stop taking a butter knife to a bazooka fight, and they need to pick up a bazooka for themselves. But because it's so foreign to them, they don't know just how to do it yet. Fighting dirty isn't Jasmine Crockett calling Greg Abbott Governor Hot Wheels. That's just needless and cruel, and it accomplishes nothing. Maybe it gets you booked on MSNBC a couple more times, but congrats. Fighting dirty is being willing to engage in different types of political rhetoric and political messaging that are actually effective and do move the ball down the field, to mix many different metaphors now. It's to appeal to voters in a language they understand that confirms something that they're already beginning to suspect at the back of their heads, and gets them to actually listen to Democrats and think that they have credibility again.
Yeah, and I think corruption is like a great example of that, where I think the education polarization, I think, has kind of led them to like, here's some convincing argument about why they shouldn't call for this issue, even if the public cares for it. And like, for example, term limits or banning the stock trading. There are some arguments against those things in some like high-minded way, but who cares? Voters overwhelmingly want it, and you need to be willing to take advantage of that. Call out candidates who are in office who made a stock deal and did something, like be willing to do those kinds of things that confirms voter suspicions about things, I think is huge. I wanted just to close, I wanted to kind of talk about Trump 2.0 overall. What would you say let's talk about the most effective, or I guess this is an example of that, the Epstein stuff. But what do you think has like kind of been Democrats' biggest mistake so far, if it's even possible to have made one? Like, what do you think has been their least successful messaging attempts, and or what is your biggest worry of messaging wise leading into 26 and 28 that you don't want Democrats to fall into?
I already mentioned Crockett's crack about Governor
Yeah.
Hot Wheels. I think that type of performative cruelty does not work, will not work.
You're not Trump.
No,
You can't pull it off.
no. And also when Trump does it, it's funny.
Yeah.
Like, because just the man is a walking cartoon character, obviously. So he gets away with it. I don't see a single Democrat who's capable of that way. Again, he's sui generis. I think they went a bit too far in on Signalgate, to be honest. I do think that if you're a Beltway obsessive like you and I, it was a really interesting story. And there was some real humor there, and like the fist emoji, fire emoji, American flag emoji. I think most Americans just shrugged that off. They were like, okay, so what? There was a group chat. I don't know why Democrats tried to turn that into a 2 or 3 weeks scandal. Um, they definitely should have been talking about accountability, or excuse me, affordability instead. But it was early. They didn't have much to work with yet. I think in terms of the most effective lines of attack, obviously, Epstein, of course, we just had an entire episode about it. I think Doge and Musk broadly was very effective. Certain aspects of it weren't. I don't think many Americans care about the cuts to USAID, while they're barbaric and are going to lead to the deaths of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people around the world. It's really hard for Joe Sixpack to conceptualize.
Yeah.
But yeah, Doge generally, I think, was very successful. And then lastly, I think the CCOT attacks, Trump's deportations to this horrific gulag, forced labor camp, concentration camp, use whatever term you want, in El Salvador, have been mostly good. I do think that they could have chosen the precise line of attack a little bit sharper, where to me, of all of these stories, and I'm sympathetic to all of these people who have been sent there, except for, of course, like the few actually really terrible human beings who might deserve to be. But like Andre Hernandez Romero, who thank fucking God is now back in this country, gentleman who was granted legal status, was fleeing persecution because he's gay, was granted residence here, did nothing wrong, did literally everything exactly the way you're supposed to, and he
Wasn't their justification was what, like a tattoo that said mom and dad or something? It wasn't even the one where they fake sketched the MS-13 on it. It was like even more of a ridiculous reach.
correct. Yeah, he had 2 tattoos, very flowery, very flamboyant, of crowns, one that read mom and one that read dad. And apparently I'm not sure if it's Trente de Aragua or some other gang that has crowns as one of their symbols, and that was their justification. Meanwhile, like, I'm not going to stereotype, but you stare at the man for 1 second, you can tell he's a fruit. You can tell that like MS-13 or whatever gang they allege that he was in was not going to welcome him. And this poor guy was sent there for 6 months, was brutally, brutally beaten, was assaulted sexually. And thank God, I actually really did not believe he was ever going to come back, because I thought he would
Yeah.
be such a terrible, terrible walking reminder of the failures and the unhumanity of this administration. But yeah, I'm glad he's back. And I don't know why more Democrats aren't talking about him and his story, and just how awful this ICE operation.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was a Bulwark interview with him recently. I watched a little bit of it, but yeah, it's impossible to look at that and not be horrified. I think I, I didn't even see the usual like blue check insane replies being like, well, he deserved it, to a lot of those tweets. One thing that, I mean, this is me being a little biased, but when you were talking about Doge, um, I remember when we watched the State of the Union, we did like a reaction video after. And even though they were all lies, I really did think it was pretty effective when Trump was like going and doing the line by line examples of things they cut that were like seemed frivolous, even though it was like transgender mice when it was transgenic or whatever. The truth wasn't there, but none of the people watching that speech or what percent are looking it up after. But I wonder if, like, I think there is a bit of a risk in attacking Doge where, like, I don't know how sympathetic people are to government workers or like college research teams or whatever, and even though there's obviously much worse cuts. But I wonder if like there's an avenue to attack it almost from an abundance perspective of saying that, and I've heard Ezra talk a lot about this, that Doge is a great idea. Someone should actually try it for real.
Yeah.
Like framing it as like, we actually do want to make government more efficient and talking about cutting red tape in certain examples. And like, I think providing kind of using Trump's State of the Union example, I think a lot of those abundance examples that have been used in the discourse about it are useful. I think getting very specific, people worry that that's getting too bogged down in the details. But I think when the details are ridiculous, getting specific instead of just like broadly saying, oh, I'm going to cut red tape, being like, here's an example of something that's clearly ridiculous, the steps you had to go through to build this thing we want to build. I think that kind of provides an opening. What do you think about that?
No, I agree. I think that's really well put. And there, to your point, there is a trapdoor if Democrats just open with a broad statement about the Doge cuts, because the obvious easy counter for any bad faith Republican or conservative pundit to make is, why do you want to fund Sesame Street in Albania or Uganda or wherever it was being produced? So sure, evoke Doge, but then immediately say, this is why fucking planes are falling out of the sky. Go on offense. Do not allow there to be an opening for bad faith actors to talk about transgender mice.
And I think the plane thing's a great example because I think that is exactly what I mean by fighting dirty, where it's like, I'm sure in some ways it has affected it. I'm sure you could find specific cases where you're like, oh, actually, like this had nothing to do with Doge. It doesn't matter. Fucking talk about it the same way Republicans would. They talk about the stupid Pete train derailment thing or whatever. That's a perfect example of something that like feels true and has some truth to it. You should talk about it then. And we were talking about the calm laws for they, them ad earlier. And I think an important thing that people miss about that ad, that it's like, oh, it's just like, it's about transgender issues. It's really combines three things that are conceptions of Democrats. And one of which I think relates to the Doge stuff, which was, it was for criminals who were in prison, so weak on crime, and then it was government funded. So that's an example with Doge. Like there is a conception that Democrats like waste your money with taxes and like they don't spend it wisely. So I think, yeah, focusing on that issue, I think like I think Democrats seem to be very aware of the conceptions of them.
Yeah.
And I think in one respect, I mean, this is a little biased for our podcast, but I think like the same way Republicans would, or maybe pre-Trump would, like when they're putting people behind, put some bro-y figures behind when you're giving the speeches. Like be very self-aware about your image in terms of like what people online think of you and what like Republicans are going to say. I mean, obviously that's politics 101. They do that, but it doesn't seem like they're like tuned in enough to these vaguely right-wing spaces to kind of understand why people are turned off by them in those respects.
Yeah. Have at least one, ideally more than one, straight male staffer, preferably from the Midwest, and don't say stupid shit. I think the idea that we need to abandon the trans community post 2024 is both insane and obscene. That said, I probably wouldn't be going to ACLU seminars and saying that, yes, you support taxpayer-funded transgender surgeries for incarcerated illegal immigrants.
I forgot about the illegal immigrant angle. There was a whole nother.
Yeah, it's just like, it's fucking batshit Mad Libs. Don't say stupid shit.
Yeah. And I mean, listen to the one transgender member of Congress who has been making some great points on this. And
he's a fucking superstar.
Yeah. So, but yeah, wrapping up 2028 predictions. We talked a little bit about it earlier. I made the Jon Ossoff case, but is there anyone that you feel like is a dark horse who people aren't kind of talking about enough right now who could take all the advice we've been giving and kind of, and also I think an important aspect of this too is that JD Vance, for all his weaknesses, if he's the nominee, I do think that's something to keep in mind. I was quite horrified by the Tim Walz debate against him. And I do think J.D. Vance is an intelligent debater on stage.
Yes. A
He's
master debater, one might say.
yes, yeah. Much better suited for that than like making quips on a stump speech or something. So who do you see as like best suited, I guess, to face JD Vance, and then any dark horses that you're kind of keeping your eyes on?
Okay, so again, I preface this with there's a gun to my head because I don't like making predictions. I'm not in the prediction game, and I also genuinely don't think the ultimate nominee is really anyone we're talking about or thinking about right now. But that said, Jon Stewart is obviously in my dream draft. I would love him to do it. I doubt he ever would. I think James Talarico down in Texas, the state rep, has proven himself to be a
Mm.
superstar during this
Hey, he already won
redistricting
on
fight.
Rogan. He
He
already
already
did
got the
that.
Rogan endorsement, exactly. He's also a man of faith. He constantly quotes scripture. He can speak really passionately, really beautifully. He's got the sauce. Um, and then I'd say to bring up the grand dam of the Democratic Party one more time, anyone who Liz Smith sees as having talent, Mallory McMorrow, um, Talarico, I believe, is one of her clients. I'm not positive about that. Jake Auchincloss, although he has to take a trip over to Turkey if he really wants to run. We got to fix that hairline. And yeah, I think those would be my topics, and definitely also Jon Ossoff. Yes.
I'm curious, like, because we've talked so much about being outsiders. We can wrap after this, but Talarico, I think, is super interesting. The Joe Rogan, was a huge fan of his. My dad's always sending me like Instagram reels of that guy. Um, do you feel like because of how important it is to like the Democratic approval rating is terrible for the party and all the need for outsiders, like, is it possible to run someone to get traction in the Democratic primary? I mean, we saw Pete do it as a mayor of not the biggest city, but is someone like that, does he need to, in this redistricting hell, find some congressional seat that he can run in, or would he be able to run from his current position?
It's tough. Couple of things. One, I have heard some murmurs that he might be making a Texas Senate bid, which
Really? I don't know if I like that.
I'm not sure if I do either. Also, I think like I could never see this being nasty, but yeah, I don't love the idea of him running against Colin Allred.
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer your question directly, I don't know. Maybe him being a state rep is actually an asset, that people see him as a true outsider who's never stepped foot in Washington. But on Talarico, if I could just hone in on him, give a mini rant about why I'm so passionate about him and his potential candidacy. One of my bugaboos for the past several months, it's been an article I've wanted to write, a column for The Guardian that I've just never quite been able to finish. It's about, it's inspired by Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone, famous book about sort of desocialization and the death of third spaces and how everyone's just really fucking lonely in America. And then I also read a great piece by Derek Thompson in the Atlantic about similar themes. I I'm of the belief that there is no social or spiritual benefit to being on the left in America, and I think that's a huge fucking problem. Um, MAGA is the single largest book club of illiterates ever amassed. All you have to do is don, no pun intended, the red hat, and you are immediately surrounded by tens of millions of people who will profess love for you, support you. Um, Again, just because you put on a fucking hat. And I don't want to be so critical here. I don't want to just like talk about Democrats being a bunch of squabbling children, a bunch of gutter snipes. But I think the magic that I've seen in Talarico and around Talarico is that he's just able to talk in a way, especially through spirituality, that makes it feel special to be on the left, that makes it feel worthy and good to be a Democrat. And it's been a very long time since any Democratic candidate has made me feel that way. Don't get me wrong, I was as coconut pilled as the next twink last fall, but yeah, there's something about Talarico's messaging, his rhetoric, how he evokes scripture, and how he just like makes me want to be a better person and makes me feel like this fight is worth engaging in. That is just
Mm.
so attractive to me.
I love that, and I think that's totally true. It reminds me, you're saying all you have to do is put on the red hat. There was a lot of talk post-election about being the big tent party, that to be a Republican, all you had to do was like Trump. Once you're in the Democratic Party, we need to make it, like you're talking about, more of a club that you want to be a part of, but also like be inviting people in. Like if you agree with us on 3 of the 10 issues, like we should be fighting to get you into the party and not shaming you for the 7 you don't believe in.
Yeah, I in this piece that has not quite materialized yet. I make up 2 terms that are very not real. I call them negative empathy and positive empathy. And my
Mm,
argument is that over really the last, say, 30-ish years, Democrats have become far too riddled with negative empathy, which is to say they're
mm,
entirely justified in caring about gay people and trans people and black people and what have you. But the way that care and that empathy and that quest for justice so often takes form is in slapping down people who perceive to wrong those groups. It's inherently
mm,
sort of aggressive and antagonistic, oftentimes called for, to be clear, but it doesn't really foster community growth. Whereas a more positive empathy, where you still are caring for all of those aforementioned communities, but you're maybe also a little bit more forgiving, and you're always seeking to just enlarge the tent, as you said. I think that's really important for Democrats moving forward, to prioritize positive
yeah.
empathy over negative empathy.
Not of any help to us now, but I thought Obama's DNC speech this time around touched on a lot of those points about like being more forgiving, like as if they were a grandparent kind of thing. And Pete, even although you made the point that I probably agree with, that he's kind of dead in the water because of the associations. I thought he told a great story about how he had a coworker who he knew was very conservative, very religious, and that she had met Chasten once they had like started dating, or they may have been married at this point, and that she met him a few days beforehand, and she ran into him in the office and said, like, "Hey, I met your friend the other day. He's he's great. Like, good for you. He's a winner," or something. And that he was making the point of, yes, I could have corrected her on the spot and told her, actually, it's not. But would that have made her more likely to continue opening her mind to this, or less likely? And he made the choice to know that that was well-meaning from her perspective, and understand that most people aren't thinking about things in that way at all. And I think, yeah, I think that's a great point. I love that positive empathy. Um, Superman's the opening. We've got the the
Literally,
public's
though,
on
I
our
said
side.
it was a great movie. Woke as
It
all
was.
hell and still amazing.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for coming on, Peter.
Ben, thank you, brother. Appreciate it, man.